Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Okay, so guys, I have a story. It's a personal experience, and it's up to you whether you choose to believe it or not. I'm not even sure I believe it fully, but it's been bothering me since it happened, so here goes nothing. Let's start with a bit of background info on me first. I'm a marine biologist, and have been for the past 3 years since I graduated uni with a master's. I got a job with a research group up in northern Canada studying Arctic and subarctic shark species around the Canadian shore, specializing in the Greenland shark. Last November, me and a group of about 15 colleagues of mine volunteered to travel to Baffin Island, following some tagged Greenland sharks to monitor their populations and migratory habits, since there was very bad weather scheduled for December. We only had a few weeks to get up there, get a few dives in and leave, so we're fairly strapped for time. It's damn near impossible to get there overland, so we took a boat out with a few tents aboard. Our sonar and diving equipment, one of the others was piloting it. I was responsible for the sonar setup, and I'd be doing some diving when we got into position. We'd planned to stick to the northwest coast of the island, in the fjords and the coastal waters, but by the time we got there, the tags were showing that the majority of the sharks had moved east, towards Baffin Bay. We stayed at our first location for a day, got a few dives in and brought in a good-sized female Greenland, but she was the only catch we got, and I wasn't picking anything bigger than our female. So after making a note of the position of the catch, we made towards the bay. We'd been itching to get out there since we'd seen the data from the tag trackers. We were excited because we knew that Greenland was pretty poorly studied, and any new insights on its behavior would be very big news. What we were really interested in was how they acted in deep water. Now, Baffin Bay has a large section of water in the abyssopelagic zone, about 2,000 meters deep. We knew Greenlands were sleeper sharks, so we were pretty adamant on trying to prove they fed at depth, since nobody's sure what they predate or how they capture it. If they dive for food, it could be proof of scavenging anyway. Our seniors wouldn't take us out into the bay at first. We stuck by the east coast of Baffin along the pack ice. Diving was an issue, but we got a few of our tagged specimens in. We spent a week total moving down the coast, about 3 separate locations. After we'd gone as far south as we were willing, the suggestions of me and a few others had gotten to the seniors, and they finally took us out into the bay, over the Baffin Hollow. Of course, we couldn't dive that deep, but we could see if we could hook any specimens at depth. On our way out, I kept the sonar on for any sign of sharks. They had a pretty recognizable signature, elongated and larger than most things out there, but as we got over the hollow, I started picking up some weird signatures, big signatures. It'd always be just a flash whilst we went past. I did show a few others, but they threw it off as rock formations along the bed. It was pretty common. For lack of a better explanation, I decided to agree, since it wasn't whale season and I couldn't think of anything else being that big down there. Moving on, we could only stay out there for a couple of days at a time, and not all of our crew could be on the boat, since it didn't have accommodation for them all, so we were basically down to a skeleton. I was classed as an essential, since I ran the sonar, so I was out on every trip. On our third venture out there, it was my turn to make a dive. We'd hooked a couple of sharks, but they weren't tagged and they were at fairly shallow depths, so nothing groundbreaking. It was me, my diving partner, then another pair who went down that day. Things started out okay, but looking back, my alarm bells should have been ringing. We'd taken roughly the same route back and forth from the position, and my sonar readings were different every time. We didn't get the anomalies we got on the first day on any following trips. They were always slightly different. Obviously, it would be officially negligible, but it's something that stuck in my head after what I saw down there. Me and my partner had decided to go to our maximum cutoff depth of about 40 meters. I remember looking down over the hollow and just seeing a deep blue abyss. It's really surreal, like standing at your door and looking at another world. Imagine it. Clear blue waters all around you, then just a gaping dark maw below. Visibility was pretty good, since there wasn't any sediment to impede us. Unfortunately, there was not a single trace of life here. On previous dives, we always had some type of fish, or even shark just swimming within view. But not today. I had no way of contacting the other diving group, but I could just barely see them, about 10 meters up and 100 meters behind us. My diving partner set about rising to get some decent footage of the scenery. I was meant to be laying some hooks. The job took us about 20 minutes and we were pretty strapped for time because of oxygen. I'd spent the majority of that time looking down, and just before I got a tug on my safety line to pull me up, I saw it. A colossal white shape. It was like a white silhouette. I was almost certain it had a glow to it, because it must have been a good 500 meters deeper than me, and it still looked massive. It was moving slowly, then it just dipped out of view, like the depth swallowed it back up. I wasn't sure what I'd seen, and I was pretty dizzy from looking down the whole time. But after that, I made my way back to the boat and gave my reports. We went back to shore that evening. We'd return the next day to check the lines. When we came back the next day, I wasn't able to dive, but I helped haul the catches back in. What was terrifying, though, was when we pulled in half the carcass of a 20-foot Greenland. The seniors were baffled and chatter started going around the rest of the crew. About 8 of us were on board at the time. Eventually, the conclusion that Greenland were cannibalistic and that they'd taken the opportunity to eat the shark that was hooked. They usually survive for a long time. Once hooked, they can still move around, and their metabolisms make sure they don't starve. But what was odd was that the carcass was cleanly cut. There were no obvious signs of tearing. I mean, Greenlands can only open their mouths so wide, and their teeth are small, made for tearing bite-sized chunks off. They're the largest species in this habitat, and none of us could think of what else could have done it. The white silhouette came to mind, and I suddenly started doubting what I thought I knew about ocean habitats. I never bought into stories about huge creatures living in the abyss. The logistics just weren't in their favor. But I recalled that this was a whale migration path, and the hollow could literally be a trapdoor for whatever that glow came from. I was reluctant to mention it, so I briefly asked the hook layer from the other diving team if he'd seen anything strange on the dive. I'm still pretty chilled by her answer. She said she'd seen the white glow too. It started deep, and she said it came within a few hundred meters. She didn't see any details, and she thought it was a trick of the light, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. Now, I'm sorry this wasn't longer, but that was my story. I still don't know what the thing was, but I know that after the dead shark, we got absolutely no more captures in the areas, not even along the coast, and 5 tags were still unfound. I've not been back to the area, and I don't think I want to. I never told anybody else, and I haven't done any fieldwork outside of Saguenay Fjord.
Wait, what did it actually look like? You said it was a shape, but what kind of shape?
It was elongated, and it was definitely wider at one end, so I'm guessing it had pectoral fins of some description. But from the distance it was, and the size it appeared to be, it was definitely larger than any whale I've seen, especially any diving whale living in that area. And it didn't seem to have a fluke. It was as if the tail end just ended in a rounded nub, like the tail was pointing downwards. I didn't investigate further because it's not often I get a chance to go out that far north. It's only been a year, and only one more group has been up since, and when that call came around in March, I was still pretty shaken up about it. Studying seal predation in Quebec is a much more comfortable position.
Lovecraftian beasts in the Gulf of Mexico. I used to have a friend who was at one time an undersea welder for Gulf Oil in the 70s, and did work on the oil rigs way out in the Gulf of Mexico. He gave it up because he was seeing things down there that were beyond his ability to comprehend and even describe, and he wasn't the only one. At one oil rig, the welding crew were getting used to seeing this giant, headless, glowing living fire hose that would zoom in from out of nowhere at incredible NASCAR speeds and would keep on zooming past the welders for up to 15 minutes. My friend then said he finally saw what 8 giant, headless, glowing living fire hoses one scary day and caught the first helicopter back to shore. He never saw the ocean ever again, and was thankful. My friend George Hale, who died in 1994, was unable to describe the predator in detail. It was too big and too close to him. It was as big to him as you are to an ant. As a matter of fact, he had to ascend PDQ because he was in fear of being crushed like a bug. But the predator had a pallor and skin texture like a sea anemone. and it might have been built along the lines of a starfish or a freshwater pond hydra. And it was eating the fire hose entity by swallowing it. Its method of propulsion is a mystery.
Okay, OP marine biologist and Megalodon buff coming through. Megalodon was believed to be a descendant of the modern great white. We say believed because the only evidence we have that they're in the same family is their teeth. They're the same shape, albeit a fair bit larger, up to 9 inches long in some cases. The size of the teeth suggests a stocky fish with a body length of about 60 feet. Estimates vary, but 60 is in the middle of the conservative and maximum estimates. They went extinct about 1.5 million years ago, which is fascinating because that coincides with early human species, so it is very possible that our distant ancestors, and it also means that they survived a long period of an ice age, the last one being at the start of the Pleistocene epoch. It's been theorized that a small group of these sharks had survived in the ocean depths. This is the basis of the novel Meg, a great read, by the way. In that, the theory suggests that the shark survives in the depths due to a layer of trapped warm water in the Challenger Deep, heated by geothermal vents and kept trapped by the thermocline. This is plausible, yes. However, what we can say for sure is that if ever these sharks had survived down there, they would be drastically changed from what we'd expect. The teeth we've found suggests it ate large cetaceans, and if it was anything like its distant cousin, it would rely on a method of hunting that involves waiting for the whale to surface for air before diving deep and charging at it from below at full ramming speed. This hunting technique is not feasible in an environment like the Challenger Deep. There is not enough food down there to sustain such a population of extremely large fish with high metabolisms. A burst of energy like that would not be worth it, not to mention the almost zero visibility. While it's true that sharks have many sensitive organs that can theoretically help it survive if it loses its sight, we know from studying great white shark brains that they were incredibly visual hunters, and losing that sense would mean they'd need to evolve in order to survive. Using this knowledge, it is safe to assume that either there is no population down there, or that the population that survived would have been changed so drastically, it would no longer be recognizable as a megalodon. I'm talking a smaller size and a smaller metabolism, meaning it would be lethargic and not as much of an active hunter. As for any trenches it may live in, unfortunately the Challenger Deep is the only trench with a drastic enough thermocline to keep a large animal trapped down there. It's the deepest trench on the planet, and we've investigated it very thoroughly. Submersibles have spent a good deal of time down there, and even James Cameron's private sub managed to get about 10 feet off the seabed, about 36,000 feet down. And so far, no ancient predators have come to claim us, which would be expected of any shark species that would be down there, since submersibles make a lot of aquatic noise and give off an electrical current, two stimuli that a species related to the curious great white would investigate.
Ocean at night is a very interesting theory about a possible colossal monster in the Gulf of Aden, Indian Ocean. Quick rundown: artificial sun built in Gulf of Aden off of Somalia. Basically huge man-made light source meant to generate power using a water source. Many marine creatures respond to light during day and night cycles and swim upward to feed or escape predators. Strange case where a cookie-cutter shark bit a marathon swimmer by following the light from the boat spotting him. Logic says that man-made lights can cause creatures to swim from deep depths. A swarm of earthquakes happens on the Gulf of Aden. A Navy task force is formed to combat Somali pirates in the Gulf. A huge force made up of dozens of world navies. Turns out it was a cover story. The artificial sun caused some ancient colossal creature to unearth. The earthquake swarm was caused by the seismic movement of such a colossal creature swimming to the surface. The task force was actually containing or fighting the creature.
I saw what appeared to be a Cadborosaurus off the coast of Haida Gwaii last summer. Got no photos of the beast, but I've got a story to tell if any of you are interested. All right, here's my story. Sorry for the long delay. Nan had far more boxes to move around than I expected. My tale starts at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, where I studied for several years in order to specialize in marine biology. All my life I was fascinated by all forms of life I encountered or read about, but the creatures that lived in the alien depths of this ocean planet intrigued me the most. From the azure reefs of the Polynesian Islands to the murky depths of Challenger Deep, everything about the ocean simultaneously terrified and inspired me. Last year was my final one taking the course, with our last assignment being focused around engaging in field research of an aquatic species of our choice. Being an avid surfer and kayaker, I naturally chose to study the ubiquitous stellar sea lions that populate the Pacific coast from South Korea to Southern California. If you're even somewhat involved in the marine biologist community, it would have been nearly impossible to not have heard about the recent decline in the population of the sea lions, especially in Alaska. Since I had an interesting premise to study off of, I searched around for a couple of days after being handed my assignment outline. My destination was located in the Haida Gwaii Archipelago, a remote and beautiful series of islands located just south of the British Columbia-Alaska border. It took me 2.5 days to drive to Prince Rupert and board a ferry, which took me to the community of Skidegate on the eastern coast of the largest island of the Haidas. After seeing the sights of several of Graham Island's communities for several days, I procured the necessary supplies for my expedition and traveled through the narrow sea passages that would take me to the reefs and sea lion rookeries surrounding a place known as Frederick Island. In particular, I was looking for a place helpfully known as Sea Lion Rocks, where one of the province's largest colonies existed. The people who named the place obviously weren't among the brightest, seeing as how the damn pinnipeds hoarded every wave-beaten rock by the dozens. A dangerous storm blowing in from the Aleutian Islands forestalled my progress for 2 days, but as the old Haida saying goes, only a fool starves on the islands. This place seemed like a marine Eden, and I was able to catch enough seafood to get me to my destination. You couldn't miss the place. From miles away, the incessant barking of the lions roared throughout the coast, and once you got up close, the smell was worse than a Sasquatch's smegma. I paddled up within 100 feet of the rookery and observed the lions for several hours, taking field notes on everything from their physicality to their mannerisms. There was something about them that made me feel off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. After paddling to the base of a nearby mountain and setting up camp for the night, I reflected on what it was that made me so uncomfortable when watching the sea lions. From what I remember, many of the juveniles seemed emaciated, as if they hadn't been leaving the safety of the rocks for fear of some predator luring them to a watery grave. They were certainly acting like that was the case, with many of them nervously looking out into the endless yonder, where the endless Pacific and stormy sky blurred into a sea of gray. Mulling over these observations, I thought their behaviors could have been due to the recent upsurge in the orcapods around the Great Bear Rainforest, or from the odd shark that had been desperate enough to search for food in the domain of the bull lions. I made a mental note to wake up early the next morning so that I could scout out a location and lure whatever it was that had been terrifying the sea lions so much. On my return to the rookery's outskirts, I brought with me several lake trout that I had caught a few miles back, along with a bucket of chum in order to lure anything that had a taste for blood. I dropped the contents of the chum into a nearby patch of kelp forest and tried to lure the lions into the ocean via the fish. Eventually, one that was starving enough to lose sense of its instincts dived into the water after the trout, as did several others. They dove further into the murky abyss, searching for anything else that had fallen to the bottom of the kelpy jungle. Nearly an hour after I had done this, I noticed that the line of buoyant sacks used by the kelp to maintain an upright position were being dragged by something massive from underneath the water. Thinking that it might have been an orca or even some sort of large baleen whale, I got excited and managed to paddle out of the way of the turbulence so that whatever was down there wouldn't capsize my kayak. I was worried as to what would happen to the sea lions, but most of them luckily clambered onto the rocks to safety just in time. The rest weren't as lucky. I craned my neck over the boat, just enough so that I could see what was going on. What I saw has filled me with a primal terror that has stayed with me to this day, especially whenever I go near any large source of water. At first I didn't see anything. It was what I heard next that made me piss myself. If I could say anything about the noise, it was like the guttural roar of a crocodile mixed with the mourning calls of a sperm whale. My entire body was stricken with fear. I knew that whatever was in that water wasn't anything that we had covered back in the comfortable halls of the university. My reptilian brain won me over, and I sat there like a sitting duck, only being able to watch as the remaining sea lions swam to shore. They were more terrified than I was, and for good reason. When the second-last lion flew onto the rocks, it was dragged down into the depths by a leviathan that I've only read about on fringe websites. It had a blowhole similar to a cetacean's on the top of its head, with a melon-like organ below it that I assume would be used for some sort of echolocation. The eyes were as ghostly as a pickerel's, and the face appeared to be a combination between that of a barracuda and a horse. When it dragged the lion back down into the water, I was able to see that it had what appeared to be whale-like appendages and a fluked tail, but the body was as serpentine as an eel. When it emerged more than a minute later, it threw the barking lion high up into the air and crushed it with its jaws. The teeth looked like the horns of a goat and were as large as bananas. Blood flew everywhere, and as the long-necked hellspawn of the sea consumed its gruesome meal, it turned its gaze to me and intently watched as I squirmed in my tiny plastic boat. Deciding to leave me alone for God knows what reason, it roared an ear-shattering, and dived down back into the dark waters. From this, I was able to make out what appeared to be streamlined dorsal ridges on the creature's back, as well as grayish camouflage patterns similar to that of a great white shark. Considering the length of the rookery, it must have been 60 to 70 feet long, nearly as big as some of the whales I've seen on tours back in the Maritimes. The turbulence from its sudden submersion nearly dragged me under, but I was able to balance the kayak enough that I could stay afloat. I waited for my certain death, convinced that it had me next in mind on its grocery list. After hyperventilating in fear for what seemed like hours, I opened my eyes and noticed that it was gone. I paddled back to shore with the intensity of a man who had seen the devil himself and lived to tell the tale, although this obviously wasn't fueled by brave heroism. Nope, it was the adrenaline our ancestors probably experienced after somehow escaping the jaws of a crocodile, from all those years back into the ancestral memories we picked up from Africa. I hugged the coasts and walked 20 miles back to my car as soon as I found the nearest portage route. Whether you choose to believe in my tale or not is up to you, but know this: the oceans have many secrets that they've yet to share with the world, and many of them will only be revealed not through the benevolence of nature, but through its gaping jaws. I don't know if whatever it was I saw back there was some remnant of the dinosaur age or an unknown serpentine cetacean, but they're out there.
Godzilla is a giant mutated underwater marine reptile. Actually, believe it or not, Godzilla possesses both qualities of a reptile and an amphibian, and he doesn't fall into either category. In fact, he shares a bit more in common with amphibians, seeing as he has gills to breathe underwater. Also, reptiles are cold-blooded, but Godzilla's body temperature can reach higher than any known animal. However, when dormant, his body temperature can remain fairly cold and stable, so it's constantly interchanging depending on his activities. One of the most incredible things about Gojira is how his metabolism works. He no longer eats food in the traditional sense. Instead, his body metabolizes nuclear radiation and stores it in what was once his stomach. The organ where his stomach should be is dubbed the plasma gland, which he utilizes and discharges. Even parts of Godzilla's hide that have fallen off can prove to be dangerous, right down to a single cell. The Godzilla cells emit every bit as much radiation as their original donor. To meet certain risks, we must take certain precautions. Some of the risks include, but are not limited to, radiation poisoning, accumulation of strontium-90 in the bloodstream, radiation sickness, increased risk of cancer of the liver, brain, bowel, lungs, ovaries, prostate, and cervical, blindness, injurious birth defects in offspring, skin malignancy, and damage to unborn children. To meet these risks, or at least minimize human exposure to scandium-90 and strontium-90, scientists must wear government-approved and government-tested radiation suits. They must agree to frequent radiation testing, and they must visit their government-appointed oncologist for cancer screening on a regular basis. The study of Godzilla's skin cells has indeed revealed a whole new world to us as far as animal and monster biology is concerned. We know that Godzilla is capable of absorption and conversion of thousands upon thousands of rads without any ill effect. These Röntgens are converted into biochemical electrical impulses inside Godzilla's brain, and this powers its heart, lungs, and other bodily organs. We know that any excess radiation is converged into radioactive plasma that is stored in what was formerly Cadborosaurus' stomach, until such time as it is forcefully propelled out of the mouth at breakneck speed. However, this breath weapon of Godzilla's weakens it considerably, and it must consume more radiation as soon as possible. How to put this knowledge to work for mankind is yet unknown. It is hoped that soon we will be able to counteract diseases such as leukemia with the radioactivity-emitting properties of the Godzilla DNA, thus saving lives. His body truly works in incredible ways. Think about. Godzilla's biological functions have essentially achieved both cold fusion and nuclear fusion, interchangeably.
God, I wish Godzilla was real. He could protect us against the aliens.
Strange lights over the ocean. Yesterday I went camping near the beach. The sun had already set, and I had already had dinner, so I was lying down in my sleeping bag trying to sleep. But I wasn't really sleepy yet, so I put on my jacket and my boots, and I went outside. The moon was full and illuminating everything like a massive spotlight in the sky. I sat down, looking at the sea and the sky, just thinking about life. After a while, I started to notice a bunch of weird orange lights rising from the horizon, disappearing shortly after. First it was just one, then a bunch of others appeared. They kind of looked like rockets shooting up into the sky, except they would appear and disappear at random. Sometimes it seemed like they were chasing each other. What messed with my head most was when they formed these triangles that slowly faded into the night sky without losing form. They would even rotate and still keep the triangle shape, kind of like a massive triangle UFO turning around itself to change direction. I didn't take any pics or recorded anything because it was dark, and even if I went back to get my phone or GoPro from the tent, they wouldn't record anything, but the lights looked very much like pic-related. This was in northern Portugal at around 10 p.m. Have any of you ever seen anything like this? These lights were shooting up from the absolute middle of the ocean, and I can't come up with any good explanation for what I saw.
I saw lights exactly as you described, rising up, forming triangles, and rotating over the ocean at a beach in South Carolina. They didn't fly off, they just kind of faded out after a minute or two of this. There were the bigger lights which formed the triangle, but there were also much smaller lights, almost like flies, that emerged from the sky and flickered about near them as the larger ones were fading out.
I'll try to Greentext to not bore you with details. Before anything, I think these monsters are about 5 feet long and about 60 pounds. They cooperate when attacking, amazing but scary. 2017, hot summer. Recently graduated from uni, marine biologist, gathering info before trying PhD. Uni contacts me about migration patterns of Humboldt squids. They set up a team with other students and professors. Do lab work before diving. We were not sure about the behavior of the shoal. All set, wait for them to end up eating at night. We see the shoal, fucking frenzied devils. Some glow while feeding, making it quite a show. Wait again till it's quiet. Be nervous. Ironically, I don't like diving as much as any average marine biologist. Dive 45 feet. I could see the light from the boat above. My colleague and I went in to look for the squid shoal when we see some approaching. Out of nowhere, around 10 squids start attacking us. One was trying to bite my neck. The other two were trying to latch on my legs. Feel a lot of bumps in my chest. Try to quickly return to the surface. Fuck decompression. They lose interest and leave. My colleague was attacked too, but I got some blood on me. Feel like shit. I ended up losing a flashlight. One fucker somehow got past the chainmail. We continued working on them, but just with cameras. I tell you, man, these shits are terrifying more than sharks.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.